Section 3. Pell, Sector Orange 9, 5/20/52, 1900 hours. Cherryh winced at the crash of something down the hall, beyond the sealed door. Tried not to show his terror. Something was burning, smoke reaching him through the ventilation system. That more frightened him, and the half-hundred gathered with him in this section of hallway. Out on the docks, the police and the rioters still fired at each other. The violence was subsiding. The few with him, the remainder of Russell's own security police, a handful of elite stationers and a scattering of young people and old. They had held the hallway against the gangs. "We're afire," someone muttered, on the edge of hysteria. "Old rags or something," he said. Shut it up, he thought. They did not need panic. In a major fire, Station Central would blow a section to put it out. Death for all of them. They were not valuable to Pell. Some of them were out there, shooting at Pell police with guns they had gotten off dead policemen. It had started with the knowledge that there was another convoy coming in. More ships, more desperate people to crowd into the little they had. It started with the simple word that this was about to happen, and a demand for faster processing of papers. Then raids on barracks, and gangs confiscating papers from those who did have them. Burn all records. The cry had gone out through quarantine, in the logic that, recordless, they would all be admitted. Those who would not yield up their papers were beaten and robbed of them, of anything else of value. Barracks were ransacked. Gangs of the ruffians who had forced Griffin and Hansford gained membership among the desperate, the young, the leaderless, and the panicked. There was quiet for a time outside. The fans had stopped. The air began to go foul. Among those who had seen the worst of the voyage, there was panic, quietly contained. A good number were crying. Then, the lights brightened, and a cool draft came through the ducts. The door whipped open. Cherryh got to his feet and looked into the faces of station police, and the barrels of leveled rifles. Some of his own band had knives, sections of pipe and furniture, whatever weapons they had improvised. He had nothing, held up frantic hands. "No," he pleaded. No one moved, not the police, not his own. "Please, we weren't in it. We only defended this section from them. None of these people were involved. They were the victims." The police leader, face haggard with weariness and soot and blood, motioned with his rifle toward the wall. "You have to line up," Cherryh explained to his ill-assorted companions, who were not the sort to understand such procedures, except only the ex-police. "Drop whatever weapons you have." They lined up, even the old and the sick, and the two small children. Cherryh found himself shaking, while he was searched and after, left leaning against the corridor wall while the police muttered mysteriously among themselves. One seized him by the shoulder, faced him about. An officer with a slate walked from one to the other of them asking for IDs. "They were stolen," Cherryh said. "That's how it started. The gangs were stealing papers and burning them." "We know that," the officer said. "Are you in charge? What's your name and origin?" "Vasily Cherryh, Russell's." "Others of you know him?" Several confirmed it. "He was a counselor on Russell's station," said a young man. "I served there in security." "Name?" The young man gave it. Nino Coletti. Cherryh tried to recall him, and could not. One by one, the questions were repeated. Cross-examination of identifications, multiple identifications, no more reliable than the word of those who gave them. A man with a camera came into the hallway and photographed them all standing against the wall. They stood in a chaos of calm chatter and discussion. "You can go," the police leader said, and they began to file out. But when Cherryh started to leave, the officer caught his arm. "Vasily Cherryh, I'll be giving your name to headquarters." He was not sure whether that was good or bad. Anything was a hope. Anything was better than what existed here in Q, with the station stalling and unable to place them or clear them out. He walked out onto the dock itself, shaken by the sight of the wreckage that had been made here, with the dead still lying in their blood, piles of combustibles still smoldering. What furnishings and belongings had remained heaped up to burn. Station police were everywhere, armed with rifles, no light arms. He stayed on the docks, close to the police, afraid to go back into the corridors for fear of the terrorist gangs. It was impossible to hope the police had gotten them all. There were far too many. Eventually, the station set up an emergency dispensary for food and drink near the section line, for the water had been shut down during the emergency, the kitchens vandalized, everything turned to weapons. Comm had been vandalized. There was no way to report damage, and no repair crews were likely to want to come into the area. He sat on the bare dock and ate what they were given, in company with other small knots of refugees who had no more than he. People looked on each other in fear. "We aren't getting out," he heard repeatedly. "They'll never clear us to leave now." More than once he heard mutterings of a different sort, saw men he knew had been in the gangs of rioters, which had begun in his barracks, and no one reported them. No one dared. They were too many. Unionizers were among them. He became sure that these were the agitators. Such men might have most to fear in a tight check of papers. The war had reached Pell. It was among them, and they were as stationers had always been, neutral and empty-handed, treading carefully among those who meant murder. Only now, it was not stationers against warships, metal shell against metal shell. The danger was shoulder to shoulder with them. Perhaps the young man with the hoarded sandwich, the young woman who sat and stared with hateful eyes. The convoy came in, without troops for escort. Dock crews under the protection of a small army of station police managed the unloading. Refugees were let through, processed as best could be with most of the housing wrecked, with the corridors become a jungle. The newcomers stood, baggage in hand, staring about them with terror in their eyes. They would be robbed by morning, Kressick reckoned. Or worse. He heard people round about him simply crying softly, despairing. By morning, there was yet another group of several hundred, and by now there was panic, for they were all hungry and thirsty, and food arrived from main station very slowly. A man settled on the deck near him, Nino Coletti. "There's a dozen of us," Coletti said. "Could sort some of this out. Been talking to some of the gang survivors. We don't give out names, and they cooperate. We've got strong arms. Could straighten this mess out. Get people back into residences, so we can get some food and water in here." "What we?" Coletti's face took on a grimace of earnestness. "You were counselor. You stand up front. You do the talking. We keep you there. Get these people fed. Get ourselves a soft place here. Station needs that. We can benefit by it." Kressick considered it. It could also get them shot. He was too old for this. They wanted a figurehead. A police gang wanted a respectable figurehead. He was also afraid to tell them no. "You just do the talking out front," Coletti said. Yes, he agreed, and then, setting his jaw with more firmness than Coletti might have expected of a tired old man, "You start rounding up your men, and I'll have a talk with the police." He did so, approaching them gingerly. "There's been an election," he said. "I'm Vasily Kressick, counselor from Red 2, Russell Station. Some of our own police are among the refugees. We're prepared to go into the corridors and establish order, without violence. We know faces. You don't. If you'll consult your own authorities and get it cleared, we can help." They were not sure of that. There was hesitation even about calling in. Finally, a police captain did so, and Cressick stood fretting. The captain nodded at last. "If it gets out of hand," the captain said, "we won't discriminate in firing. But we're not going to tolerate any killing on your part, Counselor Cressick. It's not an open license." "Have patience, sir," Cressick said, and walked away, mortally tired and frightened. Coletti was there, with several others, waiting for him by the Niner corridor access. In a few moments, there were more drifting to them, less savory than the first. He feared them. He feared not to have them. He cared for nothing now, except to live, and to be atop the force and not under it. He watched them go, using terror to move the innocent, gathering the dangerous into their own ranks. He knew what he had done. It terrified him. He kept silent, because he would be caught in the second riot, part of it, if it happened. They would see to that. He assisted, used his dignity and his age and the fact that his face was known to some, shouted directions, began to have folks addressing him respectfully as Counselor Cressick. He listened to their griefs and their fears and their angers until Coletti flung a guard about him to protect their precious figurehead. Within the hour, the docks were clear and the legitimized gangs were in control, and honest people deferred to him wherever he went.